Hello, I'm Sucheta and I'm a graduate student at the Center for Academic Achievement since fall 2010, and the subjects I tutor mainly are anatomy, physiology, biology and microbiology. In my sessions that I've had with students last semester and this semester till now, what I feel is some concept, especially when it comes to the substances, that is transportation of substances across membranes, that is mainly diffusion, osmosis or active transport. These are certain terms or processes which kind of confuses students. So I'm just kind of generally going to give an overview of them, or maybe a little, what distinguishes these processes. So first of all, what we can consider is that you have a plasma membrane, that is the membrane that covers all cells, the barrier, and that can be considered as a barrier or a gate which only allows certain substances to go in while it restricts the other substances, and this helps in maintaining the function, the structure and the concentration of substances in a cell. And this barrier that is there, the plasma membrane, and the substances that move across it, that happens through this process, what we know as transportation process, and this mainly can be through a passive process or an active process. As the name suggests, passive transportation would be something which goes along with the flow, or that which doesn't require any external energy. It uses its own energy, and it basically moves from a higher concentration gradient or a higher concentration level to a lower concentration level. Whereas active transport is just the opposite of passive. That is, here we need an external energy. There's work that is done because here the substances move against their concentration. That is, they move across the membrane from a area which has a lower concentration to an area which has a higher concentration. So these are the main two processes. There's a flowchart that I have kind of made for an overview of all this, which will show all the processes and all the, that is the active and the passive, in one chart, and so at a glance you can see the main differences. Now coming to the passive transport, this again you can have it divided, that is, you could have just a diffusion process or a osmosis process. These are the two main processes, that is passive transport processes, which helps in moving the substances across membranes. The main difference between a diffusion and an osmosis process is that in diffusion you have the solute, that is a substance, as well as the solvent, that is a liquid, moving, both of them moving to get a equilibrium solution. Let's say, like, if you take a sugar solution, say you have water and you put some sugar crystals into it. Initially you will see the sugar settle at the bottom of the glass, but then as you leave it for some time, you see the sugar slowly disappearing and you have a clear solution, but the water will be sweet to taste. This exactly is what diffusion is about. That is, you have the substance, the molecules in the cell that move, as well as the water in the cell that is across inside and outside. Both of them simultaneously move to reach a constant state where inside of the cell and outside of the cell have the same concentration. So this is what happens in diffusion. In contrast, in osmosis, the main difference here is only the water or the solvent or the liquid moves across the membrane. There's no movement of the molecules. The water moves across the membranes to get the equilibrium or the equal state on both inside and outside of the state. So, and definitely in osmosis you need a membrane, a permeable membrane, which is nothing but the plasma membrane of the cells that we have. So this is how we distinguish diffusion from osmosis, though both being passive processes. And one more in diffusion, what you could have is facilitated diffusion. Here what happens is sometimes substances could be very huge or they could be highly charged, so they cannot really move on its own across the membrane. So what happens is you can literally say piggyback, or they move on, or they cling to another transport substances which move them across the membrane, that is, they take them, they change their shape and leave them outside the cell, or they take them from outside and leave them inside the cell. So this is what is facilitated, that is, this additional substance is helping your required molecule to move in or out. This sums up your passive transport. Now coming to active transport, here as the very name suggests, we need external energy, and this is because the molecules have to move from a lower area to a higher concentration area. Here you could either have a primary active transport or a secondary transport. In primary, you have the energy being used is by the ATP, generated by ATP, hydrolysis of ATP, that is adenosine triphosphate, which we all know is the basic energy molecule in our body, and this is used by the transporter to literally pump a substance out or in. Like we have the sodium potassium pump in our body, that is in each of the cells that the sodium potassium pump that works. Whereas in secondary active transport, what happens is you have indirect and indirectly the ATP use. That is, we do not directly use the ATP energy, but we use energy from the sodium or the hydrogen concentration gradients, which use the energy from the ATP molecules. So here also we use the ATP energy, but it is not used directly. It's in an indirect form. And again, this is used to move the substances from a lower concentration area to a higher concentration area. So this gives the active transport. If you would see the flow chart or the diagram that is there overall, you can kind of see how we can easily divide it. That is, you have the transport substances, you divide it into active and passive, then in passive you divide into diffusion and osmosis, and in active you divide into primary and secondary. And so this kind of a table or a flow chart gives you an overview of the whole process in one page. So at a glance you can see what are the main features of it, what are the main differences, and how is it similar or how is it different from each other. So this also kind of gives you a view that if you have certain different terms or definitions or substance which you have confusions, or if you feel that they are similar terms, you could just maybe make tables, flow charts, and have everything, the main points pointed out in one sheet, so that when you come back to it at one glance you can just have an overview of the main points. So that becomes a little easier for you to remember and maybe a little less confusing.